great music, iconic cars, and rollerblading. The 1990s have come to be considered a golden age of humanity. And even if we just focus on Formula One, it's the same thing there too. Arguably one of the most competitive, dramatic, and technologically impressive eras of the sport. And today we'll cover it all and see what changed over the decade. But it all started with a crash. More specifically, a crash in 1989 between two McLaren teammates who were also championship rivals. No, not those two, or those two. I'm talking about Ayrton Senna and Alain Prost. These two were the most intense rivals the sport had probably ever seen. Prost was a smart and calculating driver who could accumulate consistent good results. The downside was that he was French. Senna was definitely the quicker of the two, and would have some races where the rest of the grid looked as if they might as well be driving Formula 2 cars. At the end of 1989, the two had a crash, which ultimately left the championship in Alain Prost's hands, and made Ayrton Senna really pissed off. Prost was also not too happy, thinking that McLaren had been favouring Senna over him. And so for the 1990 Formula 1 season, he left to Ferrari. And this kicks us off with the 90s, with Senna and McLaren winning the first race in Phoenix, Arizona. You might think American street circuits in Formula 1 are bad now. Just take a look at this. Fun fact, the official name of this race was the Drive to and from Walmart Grand Prix. You do have to understand just how big a deal Prost moving to Ferrari was. It had been over a decade since they'd last won a title in 1979 with Jody Scheckter. Kind of like how Ferrari hasn't won anything since 2007 now. Anyway, signing three-time champion Prost was a big deal for not just Ferrari, but the fans. It finally gave them some of that hopium they needed. And with Prost going on to take 5 wins that season, he cemented himself as a title challenger. But before we get on to Senna and his slightly unconventional response this year, there is a lot of car fanboys who wonder why Lamborghini are not involved with Formula 1. If you are between the ages of 12 and 14, you probably love Lamborghini and will be excited to hear that at a point in time, Lamborghini did build Formula 1 engines. In 1990, they supplied Lola, and then would drop out in 1993 after very little success. Stick to tractors, Lamborghini, mate. So let's move on to the title battle, because this year was very close. By the penultimate round in Japan, it was Senna who had the lead, and Prost would need to outscore him to stay in with a chance of securing the title. They lined up 1-2 on the starting grid, and then this happened.
Trying to go through on the inside, and it's happened immediately. This is amazing.
Senna drove into Prost, took them both out, and therefore was given the title. And then despite me slagging them off literally 1 second ago, the Lamborghini-powered Lola took 3rd place in this race. I take it back. Come back to F1 Lamborghini. Senna would later admit in 1991 that he did purposely drive into Prost. There's a lot of talk about fraudulent champions in F1. If you ever wanted one to get behind, here he is. Sometimes I like to sit back and wonder what F1 Twitter would have been like after this race. Prost is the rightful world champion, no? Senna must die.
What the hell?
At FP1Will, #expel end of the week. This won't be the last time we talk about intentional crashing and fraudulent champions in the 90s, but let's quickly take a look at 1991 first. In terms of the championship, a less exciting year. McLaren and Senna were by far the best driver and car combination, with no crashes needed to secure the title this time round. There were some other more interesting developments though. It's about time we mention the man with the best mustache in motorsport, and F1 YouTuber not applicable James's greatest driver of all time, Nigel Mansell, baby. Mansell had actually been the one who partnered Prost at Ferrari in 1990. He probably suffered through 1 pit stop and decided to go back to Williams for 1991, who were clearly this year the 2nd best team. And it was Mansell who finished in P2 in the championship behind Senna. Ferrari, meanwhile, were so bad, Alain Prost got dropped for the last round in Adelaide because he wouldn't stop calling the car are a piece of shit in the media. It's hilarious because things really do never change with this red team, do they? Speaking of the Italian team, something interesting did happen at the Italian Grand Prix. Michael Schumacher, racing for Jordan, scored his first points. Although he'd made his debut a race earlier in Belgium, with a very impressive qualifying session, his clutch had given out on lap 1. But after scoring points in Italy, the rest of Schumi's 91 season went on to solidify him as something special to look out for the rest of the decade. And I'm sure we're going to talk about him a lot more in the near future. For now, though, we need to get back to the mustache man, Mansell, because 1992 was about to be his year. Williams had made a car that went up and down. I know cars are meant to go forwards and backwards, sometimes even side to side. But up and down, what is this wizardry? Well, this is active suspension, and it allowed Williams to optimize their ride height throughout a lap. It would be shamelessly stolen by Mercedes years later to make terrible memes. Despite the Williams being the fastest car, never write off Ayrton Senna, who held his own against Mansell when he raced him, but suffered from poor reliability for the whole season. It made sense Senna was still winning races. The man liked his lap times as low as possible, his speed as high as possible, and his girlfriends as young as possible. Ayrton did have one big complaint throughout the season, aside from losing the title to Nigel. He found the year boring without his old rival Alan Prost. If you are Mansell, that must hurt your feelings because you can win the title and still not be doing enough for Senna. Thankfully, he was in luck. Prost was coming back.
I always come back.
Replacing old Nige at Williams for the 1993 season. Meanwhile, Mansell was off to IndyCar. Ew, America. Goodbye, every single one of my viewers. Look, I'll balance it out with an obligatory England has terrible food, weather, and teeth. So subscribe for me to have just 1 ounce of joy in this country. Before we do move on to 1993, quick shout out my boy Michael Schumacher. He had moved to the Benetton F1 team this year, took his first win at Spa. We call that Redemption Day for Michael. All right, 1993, Senna versus Prost, back for one final time. It's going to be intense, it's going to be crazy, things are going to be dramatic and wild, and Prost won by 26 points. You know, Senna was there or thereabouts. They had some battles, but the Williams, with all of its advanced driver aids and its active suspension, it was the clear best car, so it was always going to be Prost's championship to lose. 93 did see a completely new lineup for Williams, with the former Patrese-Mansell lineup now becoming a team consisting of Alan Prost and Damon Hill. Prost was once again set to retire, so who would partner the young Damon for 1994? Ayrton bloody Senna. Okay, so Damon is definitely not winning this world title. For 1994, the FIA had realized Williams had all of these advanced driver aids, and the car had become too dominant for their liking. So they decided to change the rules and remove them all, making the car Senna and Hill had to drive at the start of that season very difficult, with Senna failing to finish the first 2 rounds of the season, whereas Benetton's Schumacher won both of them. By round 3, the pressure was on. I'm sure you know the story. Senna's car failed, or if you're a conspiracy theorist, he was shot. And after colliding with the wall, he passed away. This left Williams and Damon Hill in a bit of a pickle. Their star driver was gone, but they still had a championship they could realistically fight for.
¿Quieres?
So with both David Coulthard and Nigel Mansell filling in Senna's role for a couple of rounds each, Damon tried his absolute best to bring the fight to Michael Schumacher, who had built up a big championship lead. Thankfully for Hill, as the year went on, the Williams car improved, with Damon being able to secure more and more wins. By the final round, there was a gap of just 1 point. Michael ahead of Damon. And in the closing stages of the final race, Hill was catching him. Michael's title was under threat. Then this happened. Michael and Damon had crashed, ending both of their races. Again, I would have absolutely killed for F1 Twitter to have existed at this point. In my opinion, this was on purpose from Michael. We'll get onto why I think that later on. To the FIA, it was nothing more than
just an incident on the race.
So Schumacher was handed the title, and Hill was left not only traumatized by the death of his teammate, but now mentally destroyed by his main rival. And in about 4 months, he was gonna have to go through all of that again. 1995 came around quick, with Hill once again being partnered by young Minecraft Steve. No, sorry, Will N.E. Shit, no, David Coulthard. I got all my square-headed people mixed up, my bad. Williams that year had by far the best car. But Schumacher was of course locked in because he's Schumacher. Meanwhile, Damon was basically fighting for his life. On track, things were not going well. He was making dumb mistake after dumb mistake after dumb mistake, throwing away easy points. Off track, he was still dealing with the fact his teammate had died in a car he was driving, and Michael had also well and truly got under his skin and was playing mind games with him. All the while, the Williams team just kept growing increasingly frustrated that Hill wasn't performing in a car he realistically should breeze to the championship with. By the time Schumacher had the title wrapped up for 1995,
that's too easy!
Frank Williams had informed Damon Hill that next year would be his last season with the team. He had to make it count. 1996, Williams was even better. Hill had worked through some of his personal problems. Two-time champion Schumacher had also left to Ferrari in an attempt to bring them back to the top, just like Prost in 1990, Lewis Hamilton now, Sebastian Vettel in 2015, Fernando Alonso in 2010. The list goes on. Damon even had a new rookie teammate, albeit a rookie who was also IndyCar world champion. But with all of this going in his favor, Damon Hill still nearly lost to Jacques Bloody Villeneuve. Thankfully for him, Damon secured the title this year. Finally, he could rest easy now. Well done, Damon.
And I've got to stop because I've got a lump in my throat.
As discussed before, Hill was dropped, and in came German driver and criminally underrated Heinz-Harald Frentzen. In 97, it would be Jacques Villeneuve who was the Williams team leader. I don't like Jacques Villeneuve. He annoys me. And overall, he wasn't too great of a driver. However, throughout 96 and 97, he was pretty good. Even I have to admit that as a hater. Whether he thinks F1 cars should have wing mirrors or not. Idiot. He wouldn't have it easy though, because Michael Schumacher had began transforming that Ferrari team. They were on the up, and the fight between him and Villeneuve was absolutely on. Into the final race, Michael once again led the title by just 1 point. And once again, when his rival tried to overtake him, he did this. This time it backfired. Not only did Michael fail to take Villeneuve out, he took himself out too, therefore losing valuable points. It didn't end there either. This was the third time this decade two drivers had come together in what was very obviously an intentional crash. And it was the second time it involved Michael Schumacher. The FIA was going to have to take action even if F1 Twitter didn't exist yet. And so despite Villeneuve winning the title anyway, Michael was handed a disqualification from the championship for his actions, and that's why I believe 94 was almost certainly on purpose as well. Other news from 1997 was that Adrian Newey moved from Williams to McLaren. If you're wondering why you've never heard me mention a driver called Adrian Newey before, that's because he's not one. He's an aerodynamicist and designer, and he'd been responsible for designing the dominant Williams we'd just been looking at. He's also the guy who designed the recent Red Bulls that have won basically everything, until he left and McLaren caught up. What's very interesting is that in 1998, for some reason, Williams were no longer the fastest team, and McLaren was. I'm just giving you some context as to why that is. Ferrari was also still sandwiched in there in second. Next year is our year, I guess. There was a title fight between Michael Schumacher in Ferrari and Mika Hakkinen in McLaren, but again, it was pretty clear McLaren was simply just better. better. My favorite part of 1998 is actually one very specific race. The absolute chaos that unfolded during the Belgian Grand Prix. Firstly, the start looked like this. And then because this was at a point where teams had a spare third car, a bunch of drivers just could get in those and carry on after a red flag restart. The race continued with a bit less carnage, and Michael Schumacher was leading by a billion million miles. All until he smashed into the back of David Coulthard's McLaren while he was attempting to lap him. Michael saw this as a personal attack, which prompted him to try and rip the man's throat out when they were back in the pit lane. That's not even the best part. The best part is that Damon Hill in Jordan went on to win the race 1-2 with teammate Ralf Schumacher. To put that in modern F1 terms would be a bit like Haas winning a race 1-2. Absolutely crazy business. Anyway, let's move on to 1999 because this decade ends with a bang. Ferrari looked like they were going to win the title, but the problem was they were going to win it with the wrong driver. At the British Grand Prix, Michael Schumacher had done this and broke his legs. I mean, that was pretty much it for Michael. His season was over. He had to sit out almost all of the races. But for his teammate Eddie Irvine, nothing was over. Things were close. Irvine would pull out a win only for Hakkinen in the McLaren to respond the next week. But it was at the Nürburgring where everything fell apart for Eddie. How, you ask? Well, Ferrari did a Ferrari. They forgot my man's fucking tires. How do you call someone in for a pit stop and forget the one thing you need to do? Albeit refueling still existed, but dickheads, man, dickheads. Some would argue this was intentional by Ferrari, as the team wanted Schumacher to be the champion and not Irvine. I argue the Italian team couldn't organize a haircut, never mind sabotage. In the last race of the season, Michael, who had returned at this point, gapped Irvine by 95 seconds to finish ahead of him in P2 in the race, but Mika's win was enough to take the title whether Irvine was in P3 or P2. Ferrari would just have to wait until next year. And this did really set up the next decade of F1. Michael versus Mika kickstarts the 2000s. We get over this blip of people intentionally crashing into each other. Safety took a new step forward with the tragedy of Senna and Roland Ratzenberger. And if you wanted to see what happened in the next decade of Formula One, watch this video right here on the 2000s. If you just want more DanNoSkill silliness, make sure you're subscribed so you get notified when I upload. And secondly, just a big thanks to all of these channel members. You guys are awesome. They are all so super cool. You can become one from just 99p a month, and I really do appreciate the support. Thank you so much. Have a lovely rest of your week. Goodbye.